So I would now like to call upon Dechen Rabgyal to present his paper of for which Dechen will be presenting, but there are other co-authors as well, and then we'll get to discussing it. Dechen, could you please begin your presentation? Thank you.
Kuzuzangpu to all. I think this one word suffices all three three times of the day. So I'll be presenting on behalf of my group, Jamyanamgil Karma Puntu Sewangidu Yan Kumar Bujil. Yan, he is here, and myself. At the very outset, we'd like to clarify our stand. As the very title suggests, strengthen, it is a verb. So, but we are more of lobbyists and less of academic researchers. So we take sides, and it is not a neutral topic or kind of presentation. So our topic is strengthening Bhutan's welfare programs. Personally, I would like to qualify myself in academic circle as an aspiring social scientist, but in policy circle as a utopian realist, so the welfare state. To begin with, to give an overview of what welfare state is, I will situate the concept and operationalization of welfare state in the global context, and then narrow down to Bhutan's concept and understanding of welfare state, and discuss on why welfare state matters, does welfare programs, and conclude with discussions and recommendations. Essentially, decade, it arose against the backdrop of pursuit of good life. Now the question arises, what is good life? And some scholars define it as securing basic desirable aspect of life. And it is all then within academic circle and even policy circle, who defines that basic? And what do you understand by the term basic? So it is questionable. So it is very contextual, and it depends on different society, communities, and what kind of vision that you have. So hopefully by the time I conclude my presentation, we can set some parameters of what that ideal, or at least that basic welfare of people should be like. And the idea of welfare state comes into focus within policy circle, primarily because it is a social contract between those in power and authority and citizen. There are a couple of theories explaining the origin and development of welfare state. First, there are three sub-theories under system or structural approach. First, with regard to industrial society theory, the disintegration of social modes of production, such as family, guilds, then local communities, with the advent of industrialization, so the intervention of the state, so as to protect or ensure minimum level of protection for the working class. And the second theory is the role of bureaucracy, so as to manage public goods, such as health, education, employment. So the rationale behind the role of bureaucracy in delivering public goods has led to the development or growth of welfare state. Then the Marxist scholars or thinkers say it is an inevitable product of capitalism, wherein because of the market and capitalist pursuit, there is a class struggle, and to intervene in this kind of struggle, so the state intervenes. And the other theory is institutional approach, wherein it says that while it sees market as an best or optimal mechanism to bridge the differences in the society, fight poverty, the extent or the full-fledged democratization would contribute to obstruction of market forces in a way that democracy entails freedom of speech, thought, vocation. So these full freedom is seen as a threat to market. Hence, the welfare state or the concept of state intervention comes in. Now, there are, based on these theories and existing interventions across different political systems. So there are three pillars. There are government, market, and family. And within that framework, there are also three regimes, primarily based on to which pillar does that particular political regime rely on. For countries such as Southern European countries such as Germany, so they rely heavily on family structure. So they follow that male as breadwinner, that kind of notion, and ensure protection or social protection based on such kind of thinking. The second regime type, which is liberal, they give a large and optimum majority. They see private and market forces as an effective measure of poverty eradication or provision of public goods. Countries such as United States, and to an extent, United Kingdom, with exception to the health services. And the third regime is social democratic, where it sees government as the main pillar, and which is common in Scandinavian countries such as Denmark, Sweden, Norway, and to an extent also Netherlands. So why does welfare state matter? There was welfare state, so there is already a welfare state. Why it should matter now? So with the development and sophistication of technology, there is loss of job. Then it also disturbs the traditional institutions such as family, guilds, and the changing role of women also entail changing structure of how the government approaches in everyday governance. And with technology and with current millennials, they are more keen to move and hop around. So there is a lot of informal work going on. And also with realization that intervention at childhood is utmost importance, so as to ensure a very good adult age. So these are the driving forces that makes the intervention or strengthening of welfare state more important than ever before. Sorry. So now coming to Bhutan's perspective of welfare, there was concept of welfare, state or government providing public goods for the people. And we can see from Jagtrung's Code of Conduct, Legal Code of 1729. And such a reference can be also found, can be found in Hui Chejung, that is a kind of historical document, where ensuring that peace and happiness to people is important. And under monarchy, there is important focus on welfare, such as abolition of slavery, then entire ministry known as Kidu Lembo, and Kidu Fund established in 1997. And even in Buddhist mention, even in Buddhist text, there is mention of independence as happiness and subjugation is very. Welfare state is important because through state intervention, it empowers, or it is seen as an emancipatory policy so that people can pursue independent life later on. Now this brings to our current constitutional era, because with the introduction of democracy, so there is division, there is a different form of government. So how does that Kidu system or Kidu operationalization of Kidu vis-a-vis welfare state goes along? So herein we try to distinguish between Kidu and welfare. So we see Kidu as a distinct Bhutan's political system and political approach to solve issues affecting the most disadvantaged section, and welfare state as a role and responsibility that an elected government must deliver, which is enshrined in Article 9, Principles of State Policy. So there is a clear distinction. We consider those under Article 2, Institutional Monarchy, and Article 14.2 that requires establishment of relief Kidu as Kidu, that is prerogative of His Majesty the King, and the principle of state policy that covers sectors such as employment, education, and health as a mandate of an elected government to deliver, so as to ensure or fulfill a minimum desirable need of the people. So in a way, as Article 9 says, that state should pursue and create enabling conditions for gross national happiness. So we can make out from here that of the 9 domains of GNH, so 3 critical sector of the welfare state, that is living standard, health, and education, is form core part of welfare state. Now, why it is important at this juncture for Bhutan? As COVID hit, the airline industry and allied sector was hardest hit, and our welfare system was tested. Education, of course, there's basic education, but then we knew that there are inequitable distribution of resources, particularly infrastructure, where some 16,000 students had to be taught through self-instructional material, which didn't come until 2nd May. That was 2 months after the closure of schools. And there were a lot of employees from airline industry, and His Majesty has to intervene through Sung Kyo Fund. So the protection in labor and employment was very minimal. And you have that part-time workers, informal in informal sector, so who were exposed. But then there was, as even now, there's no much discussion about how do we ensure protection during redundancies and layoff. How far and how long can we rely on Sung Kyo Fund? Cannot we design a certain level, revisit labor laws and ensure certain protection? And as Shaw describes democracy with Bhutanese characteristics, I would like to say that while the traditional pillars of welfare state, government, family, market, to an extent failed in Bhutan because His Majesty has to intervene, and that Kitu saved us, and Kitu system made Bhutan resilient. So in a way, I would say that Kitu distinguishes Bhutanese democracy and hence democracy with Bhutanese characteristics. And there's general notion that Kitu, people, some try to see Kitu as a parallel institution, but then given that democracy is a gift from the throne, His Majesty sees, doesn't want to take chance that if government fails, then there's none. So if government fails, there's Kitu system to protect, and there is kind of no, in a way, Kitu system doesn't leave room for our complete failure. So I would say that democracy with Bhutanese characteristics makes us more resilient. So now, how do we need to kind of approach? As Dashukarma in our first session mentioned, we need to change our mentality first. Because right now, when we say about welfare, we see it as a problem to fix the problem and manage the need. As Hillary Cotton says, we need to see welfare from the capability approach as exposed by Nobel laureate Amartya Sen, that if we develop capability in that intervention is towards developing capability in people. And if we can develop that capability, then we can ensure that welfare, that they can independently pursue their life, and it serves good for the society as well. So now welfare state, it also means a big government, that everywhere we are talking about government here, government in health, government in education, government in employment, everywhere. So that might not bode well with those liberal thinking that we need autonomy, independence. But then human beings are subject to, human beings make mistake. And as Bhutan, there is Bhutan saying that, so government, they have that mobilization power and that network to know the system and collectively work towards it. And in a way, that big government helped towards better governance. And this divide, I think the libertarian paternalism, as it arose against the backdrop of that political divide in the US between Republicans and Democrats. So if there is a middle way that government can intervene, but then they also give choices to people so that government intervention helps in empowering people. Now, there is the welfare state requires government intervention. But then what role can government or bureaucracy play? So first thing, as I was mentioning about reiterating Nitasha Karma's mention of mentality, right now, a general rhetoric is, among Bhutanese particularly, Cha Shudo, we serve. But then my first question is, who do we really serve? We work or I wrote civil service examination primarily to get a job so that I can serve myself first. So I think we need to change that mentality that we are in the civil service or whatever may be the sector, first and foremost thing for our own good. And by doing our own good, we need to do or reciprocate to the others. So that needs to be inculcated in us. Otherwise, there is their air of indispensability, and you kind of do not really deliver service on time, then you make people wait. And one thing is, when when those in system or civil service or bureaucracy, they need to see everything as objectively as possible, and there is no they are not neutral in whatever options they offer. So they need to see themselves as a choice architect. Whatever choices they offer has certain value or certain inclination, and in a way they should be consciously developing whatever policies they develop so that they offer best possible options to the people. And right now, in Bhutanese context, we say Buddhism is a spiritual heritage. And at times I feel so disappointed that people, particularly those least disadvantaged, say that I'm not well off or I'm not able to do certain things because of my karmic debt. I think that is wrong, because the Prince Siddhartha or Gautama Buddha, he himself denounced the caste system. He didn't accept caste system as given. So the people at those lower level or lower rung of society should not feel that their pain or their struggle should be as karmic debt. Rather, those in service should direct policies so as to empower them, and everything that is there in the system are socially constructed. For instance, inequality arose with the beginning of private property, and private property began some 15,000 years ago when the settlement began, and a first man claimed that this land is mine, and then the inequity began because the resources are limited. And those people, to safeguard the property, they fortified, they enacted laws. So this should be taken as a consideration, and that whatever we are here are socially constructed, and it is amenable and it can be made good for all. So now this is my last slide. So there is now the current focus is on technology, and with technology there will be disruptions, particularly in job market. And recently I read there are some 500 civil servants, particularly those GSP and ESP will have to leave. So there is job loss. And with regard to, as Kezang also presented about community culture, rural urban migration, and how it is impacted, the 2015 GNH survey found out that that sense of belonging to community decreased from 72% in 2010 to 65% in 2015. Particularly those who strongly agreed that the sense of community is declining. So there is changing value patterns, primarily as the theory of welfare state says, a welfare state, such a particular industrial theory, that when we shift towards certain economic mode, so we compromise on other aspect. And as a result, there is kind of disruption in traditional family structure, and issues such as unattended elderly comes up, and unattended elderly and with no homes. So these are important issues that we need to consider. Of course, there is Genshe Tsamkang, which His Majesty initiated. So this also raises the question, how much of intervention should be done by His Majesty the King alone? why is there a government in the first place if government cannot do it? So to address these, so we need to approach the program, the welfare, build or conceptualize a welfare state that addresses the needs of all life, throughout all life cycle. So as the prominent economists and the scholars in welfare state, they recommend or they suggest that life cycle framework best suits the need of the time. So to have these, now welfare state also entail huge expenditure on the government. So Bhutan is a developing country. Where do we get the money? So the first thing is, right now, every political party's campaign comes to power. There is all about exemption, then the waivers. There's no talk about taxes. We need to first institute or revise taxation system. And to an extent, currently, taxation system is based on, if it is business, it's a lump sum collection. So you just go by the stock that are available. There are no bills to verify. And also, when they first declare, it is self-declaration. It is based on what businesses declare. I do not know how much of verification is done by tax officials. That is one important component of the contribution towards building a robust welfare state. And other thing is, whenever we institute policies, there is kind of blanket coverage. For instance, say electricity electricity tax or bill waiver for 100 units in rural communities. Yes, it is good, but then in rural communities, in places which qualify as rural, there are civil servants who can afford to pay. For instance, I stayed in Takte for 4 months, but then because I stayed in a rural household, which was registered rural, so I had to pay only 13 miltam in 4 months' time. So where does it fit? So when we design a policy, we need to, of course, I'm also partly guilty because I should not have waited for policy to come in, rather based on kind of my moral grounding, I should have gone forward. So these things need to, when we implement policies, particularly certain exemptions, we need to filter out. And also, was this policy effective? The waiver of or exemption of 100-unit electricity bill is to contain the rural-urban migration. It was instituted in 2013, but 2017 projection, population projection says that by 2047, 30% of Bhutan's 800,000 people will be in Thimphu. So was that policy, or is that policy effective? So if it isn't effective, when are we going to reverse? Because there is a huge revenue leakage there. And other thing is, there was one experiment called experiment in the United Kingdom in 1926, where people contributed about a shilling, that is equivalent to £5 today, for health-related checkups. So when there are projects that are directly related to people, so people are willing to contribute. So cannot we have such an experiment going to implement projects that are directly relevant and that people feel they can contribute? So I was suggesting with my friends that if Bhutanese people contribute 1 miltam a month in a year, we will have 9.3 million. And with that 3.9 million, I think we can do something substantial. And other thing is, with regard to, I forgot to mention it earlier, right now, particularly those wage earners and those working in farms are, if you have gotten time to go through the CVS report, page number 7, so farmers are the least happiest of all class of Bhutanese. So because they struggle a lot. Agriculture is essentially a subsistence. And to make a daily living, to buy groceries, they need to work and they need to earn wages. And wages for unskilled, the daily minimum wage is 215. What can it afford? While the members of parliament, they on campaign trail, they say, and we are Nyamchung. But then when it comes to the deliberation, every government comes, then they first thing they do is pay raise, but then where is wage raise? for last the three governments has come in. So because it has implications on their daily livelihood. And second, those parents also do have the children who need to go to school. Education in Bhutan is free, but then there are incidental costs. So if we raise wages, we are also not helping their everyday living, but also contributing towards the how to raise, in raising their children, which in a way goes to nation building. Now, how do we implement it? There is no kind of one size doesn't fit all. What works in Scandinavian countries, regarded as some of the most successful welfare state regimes in the world. So we cannot really borrow idea. Maybe try and test. So Quantum suggests some ideas about doing kind of local scoping exercise. You test and then implement it. So doing such would make intervention most effective and culturally relevant. Because right now what I see is we directly borrow idea and then try to enforce here, but then we are culturally different. The way we look at our worldview is different, and then we face resistance. And I think our failure in most of the areas is also because of that. And with regard to the, this is my last bit, about the alternative contracts. These I drew primarily on the context of growing interest in informal works, particularly younger generation. So they are neither there nor here. In private, they are none, in formal sector. In government, so when there is good times, they are doing well, but then in hard times, because there is no, I don't know if they have enough savings. The CBS finding in 2015 says that on an average, a Bhutanese household has 469,752 debt. So even as at individual household, we are not doing good. So that means our saving culture is none. Maybe our earnings are less, or maybe our consumption or spending patterns are not necessarily sustainable. So in a way, government can come or certain options and offer alternative contracts that maybe they organize certain mechanism that they contribute little now so that there is kind of retirement savings later. There is one general Bhutanese saying that that we shout when in plains and we recite or chant mantra when we come across cliff. Bhutan is a very mountainous country, and quite often we might come across cliffs. So how do we address these uncertainties? So government, because there is a social contract or a contract between government and citizen to ensure through that electoral process. So government should work towards creating this that safe livelihood, both present and now, and also citizens should make an effort to contribute towards that collective good. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dechen. Are you on screen, Dechen? Because I'm trying to. Yes. Okay. Excellent. I can see you now. Perhaps if the tech person can put us both, but anyway. So yes, thank you so much. Okay, Dechen, that was, as I said, please don't mind the fact that we are late and that we don't have the same number of people, because this is, this is the thing about technology. So this is recorded, right? So this will be there, and there will be audiences to come. And when we sow a seed, we don't do that knowing that we'll find the crop tomorrow. This is the work of that takes time. And therefore, let me just offer some reflections on what I just heard. I thought that was excellent, and and covered a whole range of with the background that you provided, of course, to the rise of the welfare state, and how essentially there are various, as you said, this is like from late 19th century Germany to those who trace the actual function, the actual kind of origins of it, in terms of why it was necessary ideologically in the middle of the 20th century. But let's get to some of the specific things. So I think in the Bhutan context, the really interesting thing is that when we speak about the welfare state, we are talking very specifically about both of those terms. welfare as well as state. And, as you showed us through history, it is also the way in which the nature of the state system has evolved differently as opposed to other places, in that welfare state doesn't mean exactly the same thing as other states who just take on, where governments just take on welfareist provisions. I quite like the fact that at the very start you referred to you said, I will be taking a position, and I hope that you don't think that academic work ever will require you to disavow your positionality. It only means that you have to argue it more rigorously. It doesn't mean that you don't have a position. It simply means that, this idea, the positivist idea that there is a positive and normative divide, and that we talk about what is and not how things should be, is itself a normative division. If we say that we are not going to talk of this, we will talk of this, that itself is a normative thing. So in social science, this positive normative divide has been discredited ever more, and should even more be discredited. And I think it's, as long as you have the rigor, the idea of good academic work is to persuade audiences. And I think in that sense, you don't have anything to be apologetic for in raising these questions. So I thought there's one thing that I did want you to say, actually a couple of things I wanted you to say a bit more about. So when responding, could you say a bit more about the life course framework? I think that was interesting to, for those who are not aware, please say a bit more about the life course framework, as well as another term that you used about choice architects, right? So you referred to how government or bureaucracy could be choice architects. Which in sort of intuitively one gets the sense of what you mean, but could you link that somehow to something a little more concretely, and perhaps give us an example of what that would look like, how we would recognize it? So maybe these two terms I wanted to kind of hear more from you about. You raised a whole set of really important points around, not just the data, but also the fact that welfare needs to be seen from perspectives of the capabilities approach, that people who are disadvantaged should not feel that they are disadvantaged. They are somehow lacking in worth, or connections, and that's something to be ashamed of. The disadvantage needs to be addressed, of course, as people, and this is why public service seeks to do that. I don't know if you already know this, but it might interest you that, there are groups like, and you can read this online, organizations like the Patriotic Millionaires in the US. And so there are organizations who are, from what one can tell, who are millionaires who say, please tax us a bit more. So because we want society to work and we want no one to actually do absolutely without. So basically the idea there being that progressive, something you were also referring to, about how policy design should be in such ways that, especially with the tax system, that progressive tax systems actually can help in situations where there are inequities that cannot otherwise easily be addressed. I just thought that was an interesting example given the context of, and also your the rural, your ability to pay electricity example, again, a very concrete and very good example of how these sorts of experiences make one more alive to thinking about designing a policy. It requires that attention, and how do you balance with making a policy that's broad enough for it to be properly implemented and monitored, but also not blunt, in the sense that it's able to discern between different kinds of individuals it affects. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Yes, I mean, the another point that you raised was about, if people were aware of what their funds would be going into, perhaps they would be, they would think and understand the welfare rationales more. And yes, I mean, certainly there's research that corroborates that. I mean, as you probably also know from your experience of being here, is that so in taxes in the UK, for example, you pay taxes and then you pay national insurance. And if from the point of view of the payer, they are both things you pay, but the idea is that the taxes can go into a whole range of things, but the national insurance goes into health and that kind of thing, so that people are aware that there's a certain amount of contribution that they are paying, which goes into a service or a particular aspect of welfare. the socially constructed stratifications, and how, because they are socially constructed, they can also hopefully be socially reconstructed or reperceived in ways that make them more amenable to to not perpetuate disadvantage, was also a really, I think, was a point that resonated very well. The public service rationales, a final, I think this is my sort of final point on this. The public service rationales, when you said who does a bureaucrat serve, and the idea is that of course they serve the people, but following on from the discussions we had this morning as well about how do we bring about, inculcate those changes in attitude or perception or behavior, so that people actually think that they are not just serving themselves, which is as you yourself acknowledged, is the reason why many people go into this. So maybe a bit more about how that part could be addressed. I think that's all I think I have by way of sort of response at the start. So please, could you reflect on some of these things? If anyone, of course, has a question, they can raise hands.
Sure, thank you very much for your compliments. I think one I forgot about the intergenerational equity, which I shared the link, particularly the page number 15. So by current trend, in the developed countries, the younger generation are facing difficulties, and their earning capacity is worse off than their previous generation. So in a developing country like ours, we don't face, because we are developing and it is expanding economy. So as we progress, so how do we address these sort of challenges? Because these are inevitable. So we also need to prepare from that angle. Coming back to your comments, the life course framework, it essentially covers the intervention in stages. That first, how do we intervene at childhood? And intervention at childhood is very much, it is found very impactful in a way that it shapes how you grow up and what kind of life you live later, from education to health intervention. So right now, in most of the advanced countries, the realization is that if they can intervene and make the childhood life more impactful, then most of the problems that their citizens face at old age or adult life would be solved. And then this, after childhood, you go to work. So how is your work life? The security, the leisure time, and your life in workplaces, how is work environment, and then the old age. So it essentially covers the entire life stages of a person normally undergoes. And with regard to the choice architect, I found it very likable, because from the book The Nudge. So the example is such that everything is not neutral. So a government organization floats a tender to design or to design a building or a certain infrastructure. So the designer or the architect or engineer comes up with a certain design. Of course, the requirement is to have a design or a certain kind of a certain map or structure. But then it is in the hands of the architect or designer which place to put where. Where should the toilet go, or where should the bathroom fit in? Where should the reception, or where should the the main office, or the office, or the chamber of the head of the organization be? So it all boils down to the decision that is made by the the designer, and the choices that are determined by the public officials. So the public officials have that influence. So when you construct road, you're not constructing a road alone. So you are determining which village it should get first and which site it should be taken. So in a way, that kind of civil servants or that public servants have that power to maneuver or design certain policies, they think that is best for the community. And I don't know. I think that is all. And one thing what is not being talked with regard to Bhutan is the inheritance tax is not talked much. I was discussing with my foundation leadership program alumni that recently there was case of stolen turquoise and Z. So hadn't there been police and that X-ray machine, the turquoise and Z would not have been kind of retrieved or gotten back. So there was a state mechanism, that is police, who is paid by the state, that helped that very person or the owner of the lost property retrieve them. So he or she should pay more than those who do not have such properties. Because for those people who do not have properties, police have no much role to play or have them. So because police help them retrieve and protect their properties, these people also should pay equally to the state so that the system functions more and they benefit by protecting, by upholding the current system. Yeah.
Thank you, Dechen. Two things I would like to say there that was really interesting. One, you've just drawn attention to this, this question of path dependence, that if we take a certain road, the sort of the social scientific term for that, it would be path dependence. But if we take a certain road, then sometimes that does mean that we cannot go back to the fork in the road and take other roads. So when designing policy or interventions, there is a path dependency at work. So if we decide to, and that's how I read the whole choice architect thing, that these are path dependent choices which have different opportunity costs. So if we go along one pathway, then we can't easily reverse and take another one. Then we have to take with the consequences of that path, and therefore processes of whatever you want to call it, design, consultation, feedback, are really important at the point at which the paths get chosen. And again, with the fact it's not just consultation, it's how that is formalized, and there is a whole range of kind of institutions that deal with this. And this brings me very much to something, I'll come back to your paper, but this brings me something very much to how this project actually was kind of generated. So when I initially applied for this project of the Bhutan Biodemocracy and Resilience, that we had those conferences, then on the back of that, because of what we have been talking about and thinking about, and every such event with all of the people who are here and who have been here, just convinces me more and more of how important it is for us to have many more of these deliberations. And certainly in the orange report for the last year's conference, in the preface to that, I mentioned that we have this project, which is to be underway, where the idea precisely is to look at these sorts of questions, and I hope which looks at how can we make sure that when looking at specific sustainable development goals, what is the role played by the ways in which narratives of development work? Because the thing with policy is that policies don't always not work because they were not properly implemented. So if we think of, well, this is a good policy, actually it simply didn't work because of on the ground, then that's a very kind of linear view of you take a policy and somehow it's not worked. The point is you have to understand not just that it hasn't worked, but also like why something works, because even sometimes unworkable things or impractical, unfeasible things that might seem impractical or unfeasible at the first start, if we have proper narratives, then they may help to kind of entrench policies that might be useful. So for instance, this question that you're raising about, for instance, when we think about something like taxation, or then if there are narratives that people understand why it is important to have progressive taxation system, then that might stick more and improve compliance than simply, and than simply assuming that everyone understands why that's the case. Your example of this the Z and the things that were recovered for this person, and why people who have more that needs to be guarded actually use state services more, which is the example that you just gave. Yeah, which is the example that you just gave. Yes, I think it also draws attention to the missing variables question in social science. And I think that's just so interesting that, for us, when we think about, most people will say, actually, the poor use the state services more anywhere, not just Bhutan, that, because you have to take care of you have to, food subsidize, things like that. But actually, that's only because we are missing all the other variables, which are all the other ways in which that people who are who are well off and who don't need those kinds of state help still also rely on the state for other kinds of help. And in this case, it would be like protection of property. So on the one hand, there's subsidized food, but there's also other ways in which everyone requires, a functioning system which takes care of the welfare of people. Tharchin, if you have something to say, we have. We are recording it, and I think that's the important thing. We will upload this, so don't worry about all the time overrun, etc. The Dechen, sorry, before going to Tharchin, Dechen, did you have something else to add? Did you have something else to add?
Maybe I'll thank my friends. Jan, he was here. So it is simply out of our passion to work on this area, seeing His Majesty travel, work, and providing those floating the Sungcho Fund, the floating shares and bonds from Sungcho Fund. So we felt that it is time to kind of revitalize the welfare state, because if we go back historically in kind of US and UK, the Great Depression gave birth to a New Deal. And in the UK, the Bill Race report, of course, there are shortcomings. So we thought that it would be a good opportunity to reflect on the overall system, because education, it is being worked now because of His Majesty's command. And health, I think they are also taking care of a bit in pieces. And we didn't see this happening in the labor and employment sector. So we thought that it might, particularly this discussion or this pursuit of our interest would maybe trigger some thoughts among policy circles. So we were, one of our friends is in Canada, so I was in the UK then, and so we had to configure 3 different time zones. So I would like to thank them for making this possible. Yes.
Thank you. And every effort, every dream, every planted seed matters. It may not be visible immediately, but every drop in the ocean makes a difference. So, this is, it's really important that you're thinking about this, and that these are issues that are of vital importance, and it's important for everyone to hear this, and people eventually will. Tharchin.